Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to finally start week two's material. In week two's material, what we're doing is we're looking at supply and demand, okay, supply and demand analysis, and we're going to look at market equilibrium, okay. Supply and demand is a tool that all three groups of economic schools use in macroeconomics, okay? Neoclassicals use supply and demand in a particular way. Keynes used supply and demand in a particular way. And the textbook Keynesians use supply and demand in a particular way. Okay, so we can all agree on supply and demand, okay? When we're talking about capitalism, the thing that ultimately we are going to be talking about is supply and demand, okay? As we'll see when we start talking about the theories, it is interesting how different theories can get different results simply by using the same tools of supply and demand, okay? Before we get a little ahead of ourselves though, what we need to do is talk about simply supply and demand. We need to introduce you to supply and demand, okay? Now, supply simply refers to what businesses produce, okay? It's the supply of goods, supply of water bottles, the supply of cell phones, the supply of sunglasses, the supply of Coca-Cola, hamburgers, whatever. Demand refers to what people buy, okay? It refers to, if you remember back from last week's material, the expenditure approach, it refers to consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, okay? That's demand. So an easy way for you to maybe remember these concepts is that supply refers to businesses, okay, to what businesses produce, and demand refers to the expenditure approach, okay, consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, okay? Wherever these two lines meet, supply is going to slope upwards, demand is going to slope downwards. Wherever they meet, where my forearms are currently touching, that's going to be a point that we call equilibrium, okay? The treatment of equilibrium is actually where the different schools of thought start to disagree, okay? Neoclassicals think an economy will always find its way back to equilibrium. Keynes completely disagreed with that. The textbook Keynesians are very close to the neoclassicals, but not quite there. So that's what we're going to start talking about next week, okay? For now, we're simply going to talk about, we're going to introduce supply and demand analysis. I'm going to go through the PowerPoint with you guys, and then after the PowerPoint, in the second half of this class, so it'll be after I'm done going through the PowerPoint, we're going to start doing some supply and demand problems together. I'll just do them on the board, okay? And you can follow along with it, because I'm going to teach you something called the four-step method, okay? Then after that, next week, like I said, we'll start the neoclassical model, okay? For now, though, I'm going to go through, if you decided to read the book, then you should have read chapter 3 by now. And you should have also gone through this PowerPoint before watching this lecture, so that way it's a little bit easier on you. You're caught up to speed, okay? So let's start with supply, demand, and market equilibrium, okay? A firm is an organization that makes things, okay? Firms are just another word for businesses, okay? That's what a firm is. I prefer the term business enterprise, but most economists use the word firm. An entrepreneur, it's a person who organizes, manages, and assumes the risk of the firm. The entrepreneur is generally the boss, right? It's the guy who starts up the business, starts the company, okay? And households are the consuming entities, right? It's a household. There are people who buy cell phones, water bottles, tablets, etc., okay? In a product market, okay, a product or an output market, that's where goods and services are exchanged, okay? So in a product market, it's where a good or service is exchanged, such as a water bottle, right? In a product market, I handed money to the firm, okay, to the entrepreneur of that firm, and in return, I got a water bottle, okay? I did that on an output market. An input or a factor market is where the resources used to produce the goods or services are exchanged. So an input or a factor market would be where the plastic was purchased to make the bottle of water. Or if you remember back from last week's lecture, an input market is where Ford purchases its labor, right, the people who make the cars, the machines that help labor make the cars, and the rubber, the steel, things like that, that go into the car. Ford, after purchasing all these things on input markets, then sells the finished product, the car. It sells that car on an output market, okay? So the car would be an output, whereas the steel for the bumper, the frame, the brakes, the rubber for the tires, all that is made and purchased on input markets. Which we can summarize that as the circular flow. This is called a circular flow diagram. You have businesses and you have households. These are input markets and these are output markets. Okay, this is slide number 6. Since it's a circular flow, this is called the circular flow diagram. Since it's the circular flow, we can just jump in wherever we want. So let's start with households. Households supply their labor, their capital, or their land to firms. For the most part, households supply their labor to firms, right? You go out, you're an adult, you find a job, okay? You're supplying your labor to that business. However, maybe you're wealthy, right? You own some land, okay? If you own land, then what you're doing is you're supplying your land to that production process, okay? Or capital. Maybe you're an entrepreneur. You own machines, right? You own car-making machines. Then you would be supplying your machines to the production process. You do that on input markets. So you supply your land, labor, or capital on the input markets, okay? And I should just mention, as an aside, land, labor, and capital are known as the factors of production, okay? Factors of production, okay? So, in the circular flow diagram, households supply the factors of production to firms on input markets, or in input markets, okay? So, factors of production go to the firms, and in return for the factors of production, households are paid what you call remuneration, okay? Remuneration is simply compensation for you owning the factors of production, right? So, you sell your labor to a business, right? You work 40 hours a week at $20 an hour, okay? Well, what you end up getting from that is a paycheck, okay? You get your wage, okay? So then that's your remuneration. So in exchange for your labor, right, or maybe your capital or your land, you supply it to the firm, and the firm gives you payment for it, okay? Now, once the firm has all these inputs, it turns them into outputs, right? Let's take Ford. Ford, a firm, a very big firm, what they do is they use land, labor, and capital to produce cars, okay? Well then from those cars, they supply cars, right? They're a business. They're in the business of supplying cars. They supply those cars on output markets. On an output market, you supply goods or services, right? The good would be a car. A service would be if you're an architect, right? You supply your services as an architect, okay? So firms supply their goods in output markets to households. Households demand those goods and services, right? Households need architects, they need bottles of water, they need cars. So what you end up getting is this flow of goods and services going from the firms to the households on output markets, and in exchange for the goods and services produced, households pay the firms. Okay? You pay the firms, which then gives the businesses the money they need to go hire the inputs again. So it's a circular flow. You can envision all economic activity as one big circular flow. Two very important markets in capitalism. The first one is the labor market. The labor market is simply where labor is supplied and demanded, right? You supply your labor and some businesses want to hire you. The second one would be the capital market. Capital markets are where it's simply like Wall Street, right? But it's not necessarily confined to Wall Street, but it's where businesses take out loans, right? It's the markets in which businesses take on loans or debt so that they could purchase additional inputs. And as I mentioned before, just it says here, factors of production. Factors of production are land, labor, and capital. Okay, now we're getting to supply and demand. Here's an incredibly important definition. Quantity demanded. Okay? Quantity demand, and this is very important because there's a difference between quantity demanded and demand. Okay? It's going to be very different. Quantity demanded is how much of a product you want to buy at a specific price. So let me say that again. Quantity demanded is how much of a product you are going to buy at that price. So at a price of $1, you buy 3 water bottles. At a price of $2, you buy 1 water bottle. Okay? But it's at that current price, right, at the price that exists, how much are you going to buy? Okay? That's quantity demanded. Down here in blue, this is a very important distinction to make. Okay? If there's a change in the price of a product, if the price of this product changes, the price of this changes from $2 to $1, that affects the quantity demanded. Okay? So if at $1 I was going to buy 3 of these, let's backtrack. If at a price of $3 I was going to buy 1 of these, and then at a price of $1 I will buy 3 of these, then what we end up getting is an inverse relationship, okay? And the quantity demanded is changing, okay? The quantity demanded is changing. At a price of 3, I would buy 1. At a price of 1, I will buy 3, okay? Price of 3, my quantity demanded is 1. At a price of 1, my quantity is 3. My quantity demanded is 3. Okay? So what we can see here now is this inverse relationship forming. As price goes up and down, as price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay? That's, we're going to see in a little bit. That's the law of demand. The law of demand is as price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay? To finish off this blue blurb here, if the price changes, so if the price of water bottles change, that affects the quantity demanded. Okay? The quantity demanded changes when price changes. So if you have a change in price, that leads to a change in quantity demand. Anything else, income, expectations, whatever else, income, preferences, that affects demand. Okay? You're going to see the difference in about 5 minutes, but I'm just laying it out there for you now. Okay? If there's a change in price, it's a change in quantity demand. If there's a change in anything else, it's a change in price. Anything else, there's a change in demand. I was just thinking to myself, I wanted to write that on the board. So I'm going to shut this off. Left over from last week's lecture. Okay, so if we have a change, which you may know that symbol, delta, right? Delta means change. So if there's a change in price, then it leads to a change in quantity demanded. Okay, if there's a change in price, it leads to a change in quantity demanded. If there's a change of anything else, which could be income, expectations, okay? Anything else, that leads to a change of demand, just demand. Okay? That's the difference between the two. Change in price leads to a change in quantity. This is very important. A lot of people get confused all the time with this. If there's a change in price, there's a change in quantity demand. If there's a change in anything else, such as there's an increase of consumer spending, then that changes demand. But if prices change, then quantity demanded changes. You just have to wait for it to heat up again. Okay, so this idea of a price and a quantity demanded relationship. Okay, so you have a price and a quantity demanded. At a price of $3, we'll buy 1, and at a price of $1, we'll buy 3. I mentioned that gives an inverse relationship. That allows us to make a demand schedule. Okay, a demand schedule we're going to see on the next slide is just a table showing how much of a product people are willing to buy at different prices. Okay? So it's a table, a statistical table, where it says, okay, at a price of $3, you're willing to buy 1 bottle of water. At a price of $1, you're willing to buy 3 bottles of water. Okay? So that's a demand schedule. If we take all the points on a demand schedule, okay, if we make the price the vertical axis, and we make the quantity demanded on the horizontal axis, then you can graph a demand schedule as a curve. Okay? A demand curve is a graph that illustrates how much of a product people are willing to buy at different prices. Okay? So here we have a demand schedule. On the left-hand side, this is a demand schedule for Alex. Okay? You have the price per gallon. Okay, the price, $8, $7, $6, $5, $4, $3, $2, $1, $0. Okay? It's for gasoline, Alex, right? But we could just as easily make it bottles of water. Okay? So you have a price that's going down. And as the price goes down, he's willing to buy a certain quantity demanded. Okay? For a price of $8 a gallon, he's not going to buy any gasoline. For a price of $7, he's going to buy 2 gallons of gasoline, etc. Okay? So at a specific price, at this price, you're willing to buy a certain quantity demanded. Okay? You have a certain quantity demanded. If you took all of these points and graphed them, you get a downward sloping demand curve. Okay? So what we have here is a price. I mentioned that price could go on the vertical axis and quantity goes on the horizontal axis. So what we end up having here, price for $8 and 0. So that's 0, 8. Okay? Then we have 7, 2. Right? For 2 gallons, $7. So at a price of $7, you're willing to buy 2 gallons. At a price of $2, he'll buy 14 gallons. So 2, 14. They didn't put a dot in for that one. So for $1, you buy 20 gallons. $1, 20 gallons. Okay? So what you do from this table, once you have a demand schedule showing you how price and quantity demanded are interrelated, right? At a specific price, you have a specific quantity demanded. Once you have this table, then you can plot the different points, right? You can plot the different points. If you draw a line through it, you have what is called a demand curve, okay? This is a demand curve, and it's the foundation of macroeconomics, right? Now we're getting to a demand curve. Okay? Supply and demand, this is demand. Okay? You may have noticed, right? I hope you did, demand curves slope downwards. Okay? As the price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay? That's the law of demand that I mentioned. We're going to come back to it on the next slide. As the price goes down, quantity demanded increases. It is incorrect to say, this is an important little caveat, it is incorrect to say as price goes down, demand goes up. That's not right. Okay? Remember what I put on the board. Price affects quantity demanded. Price does not affect demand. Income, expectations, anything else affects demand. But it is incorrect to say price affects demand. The only thing that price affects is quantity demanded. Okay? The law of demand. Law of demand is the negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay? As price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay? That's why there's a negative slope. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. It's what you would call an inverse relationship. An inverse relationship is when one thing goes up, the other one goes down. Okay? So as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Demand does not go down. Remember, I'm just trying to emphasize this. If price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. It is incorrect to say if price goes down, demand goes up. That's not true. If price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay, so what determines demand? Not quantity demanded, what determines demand? Well, income, right? If your income doubles, you're probably going to go out and buy more things, right? let's say this costs $3. At my current level of income and a price of $3, I will buy one of these. Okay? Well, if my income rises at a price of $3, maybe now I'll buy two. Okay? Or steak, right? At a price of $20 per steak, maybe go to a nice steakhouse, maybe it's $40. At that price, you were only originally willing to buy one. Well, now you just became Bill Gates, right? So your demand for that has gone up, right? At every single price, you're willing to buy more steak. If your income goes up, this curve shifts to the right or to the northeast, goes this way, so that you would have a new curve here. If your income goes up, right, then the whole demand curve shifts. It shifts to the right. Okay? If your income goes down, right, if you get fired, right, then the demand curve shifts to the left or to the southwest, right? It'll be in here. Okay? So an increase of demand goes that way. This is an increase of demand, and this is a decrease of demand. One second, I just want to make sure that the right side is in the frame. Okay? So another thing now, there's income that affects demand. Another thing that affects demand is net worth, right, or your wealth. How much money do you have accumulated? Okay? If you have a lot of wealth, right? If your wealth suddenly doubles, right? Somebody leaves you an island in the Caribbean. Somebody leaves you that. Now you own an island in the Caribbean. Well, your demand is going to go up, right? You now own more assets. If you own an island in the Caribbean, you probably can afford to buy more steak, no matter what the price is. So your demand goes up. Okay? These are some other things that determine demand. Okay, slide 20. Tastes and preferences. Okay, income and wealth. And the prices of other goods. Okay? If the price of Coca-Cola goes through the roof, then more people will start drinking Pepsi. Right? They're substitutes, Coke, Pepsi. So tastes, preferences, the prices of other goods. Also, a big one, especially in this course, a big one that determines demand is expectations. Okay? If you expect the price of something to be higher tomorrow, then you're going to buy a lot of it today. Or if you think the price of something is going to be lower tomorrow, you're not going to demand it today. So here now what we're talking about is the shift of demand versus a movement along the curve. Okay? Remember, if price changes, then it's a change in quantity demanded. If a price changes, there's a change in quantity demand, and that means we're going to move along the curve. Okay? So if the price of gasoline, the price per gallon, goes from $5 to $3, then we simply slide along the curve. Okay? The price of gasoline went from $5 to $3. At $5, we were going to buy 5 gallons. But at a price of $3, we're willing to buy 10 gallons. Okay? So if the price changes, we move along the curve. We slide along the curve. This is incredibly important to understand. If a price changes, there's a change in quantity demanded, which means you're going to slide along the curve. On the other hand, if anything else changes, if your income doubles, if you get more wealth, if your expectations change, if your tastes and preferences change, anything else other than price, that will shift the demand curve. Okay? So, once again, if the price changes, you slide along the curve. But if your income goes up, the steak could still be $5, but you're going to buy more of it, right? You're going to buy more of it at each price. So the demand curve shifts outward, okay? This was our original one. This is our new one, okay? So remember, and it says it again right here, but if there's a change in price, that means there will be a movement along the curve. If there is a change in anything else, then you are going to shift the entire curve. Okay? This was our original demand curve, and income went up. So therefore, we shifted the whole curve. We shifted it from here to here. Okay? But if the price changed, the price goes from 3 to 5, then we're not going to shift curves. We're simply moving along the curve. Okay? Shift of the demand curve. The shift is brought about by a change in the original conditions. Okay? Basically, anything other than price will shift a demand curve. A movement along a demand curve is brought about by a change in price. And this is slide number 23 from week 2's PowerPoint. Okay? I would, even though I'm going over it right now in depth, I would still encourage you to read it, make sure you understand it. Okay? A change in price leads to a change in quantity demanded, which is a movement along the curve. So changing price, change in quantity demand, and a movement along the curve. Change in anything else leads to a change in demand and a shift along the curve. Okay? Now, oh God, I'm sorry. A shift of the curve leads to a shift of the curve. I'm going to say that one more time because I might have just confused you. If there's a change in price, then it's a change in quantity demanded, and you move along the curve. On the other hand, if anything else changes, such as income, tastes, preferences, expectations, then it's a change of demand, and that's a shift of the whole demand curve. Right? So changing price, movement along the curve. Anything else, shift the curve. Okay. Market demand. Market demand is simply the sum of all demands in the economy. Okay? So, if you have my demand plus your demand plus your neighbor's demand plus everyone in Jersey City's demand plus Bayonne plus New Jersey plus Pennsylvania plus the Northeast plus the rest of the country, if you add up all that demand, you end up with market demand, or a concept that we call aggregate demand. Okay? Aggregate demand, it's total demand in the economy. Okay? Total demand in the economy is market demand. Okay? It's the total demand of U.S. citizens. Okay? As it says here, it's the sum of the quantities of goods or services demanded by all households. Okay, now let's talk about supply. Okay? We finished up on demand, now we're going to go to supply. Well, first, before we do that, I should draw this on the board. We have our demand curve. We label it D for demand. Okay? On the horizontal axis, put a Q for quantity. Okay? So you have a demand curve that slopes downwards. There's quantity, and then there's price. Okay? Let's say that it isn't price that changes. Let's say that income doubles, right? Your income doubles. Well, price hasn't changed, right? Income changed. And if income changes, then that means demand changes, which means we're going to shift the curve. So let's say that your income has doubled. If your income doubled, that will be an increase of demand. An increased demand, as I mentioned before, shifts the curve to the right or to the northeast, right? It goes this way. Okay? So an increased demand shifts the curve outwards and to the right and up, to the northeast or, out to the right. Okay? Then we label it, our original demand curve is D0. Okay? The original one is D0. What that means is it is demand at time 0. Okay? Time 0 being our initial demand. Okay? So, D0 was the initial demand curve, and now your income doubled, so you're going to buy more stuff. Even though the prices of those things are the same, right? A steak still costs $20, but even though that steak costs $20, you now have double your income, so you're going to purchase more steak. So, your demand has shifted out and to the right, okay, or to the northeast. On the other hand, let's say that you lost your job. Knock on wood, right? Hopefully not. If you lose your job, then what you have is less income. Less income means that the demand curve will shift this way. Okay, you have your original demand curve, D0, and if your income goes down, or if your tastes and preferences change, you don't want any more Coke, you want to drink more Pepsi, then this will be your new demand curve. Okay? You'll have a new demand curve here that shifts to the left. Okay? Shifts to the left and downwards or to the southwest. Okay? That is your demand curve in a reduced demand. Okay? Demand has gone down because your income went down, or your tastes and your preferences changed, or anything else. Okay? The only thing it could not be is prices. Price stayed constant. Okay? So again, and this is important to remember because you're going to have to manipulate supply and demand curves in this course. Okay? So you have a demand curve right here. This is your initial demand curve. If there's an increase of demand, it goes that way. Okay? Increased demand goes that way. Decreased demand goes that way. Okay. Increased demand, up and to the right. Decreased demand, down and to the left. Okay. This is our original. This is an increase. And this is a decrease. Okay? It's very important to remember. Just setting it up for our supply. Now we're going to move on to supply. Okay, so now we have a supply curve we can talk about. Demand under our belts. Supply is actually pretty easy. If you understand demand, supply is sort of just the opposite, right? Whereas with demand, right, we had our law of demand where price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay, so price went down, quantity demanded went up. Here, instead of quantity supplied going down if price goes up, if price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. Okay? And that'll allow us to draw a supply curve. But it's the same concepts, really. So we have firms, right? Firms are businesses. Firms are the business enterprise. What they do is they produce things. Okay? When they produce things, they produce it because they have one goal in mind. What does every business want to make? Profit. Businesses are interested in profit, period. They want to make more money. So profit. Profit is simply revenues minus costs, okay? Revenue is what you get from sales, right? If you sell a bunch of cell phones, then you're going to make revenue, okay? However, you don't get to keep all of that revenue coming in. You have to pay your workers, you have to pay people who make plastic and electronics, things like that. Okay? So you don't get to keep all of your revenue. You have some costs. Revenue minus cost is profit. It's the amount of money you take in as a business minus the amount you have to give out, okay, for costs. But businesses are interested in profit. Businesses are interested in one thing, that's profit. Okay? That's what allows them to actually stay in business. So now we can come up with a quantity supplied. Okay? Quantity supplied simply states the amount of a particular product a firm is willing to sell at a particular price. So at a price of $500, Samsung is willing to sell 2,000 phones, whatever, right? At a price of $2, Aquafina is willing to sell 1,000,000 water bottles. But at a price of $5, Aquafina is willing to sell 2,000,000 water bottles, right? If the price goes up, the quantity supplied will go up, right? They're going to produce more if there's a higher price. That allows us to get a supply schedule. Supply schedule is exactly the same as a demand schedule, except it's supply instead of demand. Okay? Here we have a supply schedule, right? For each price, Clarence Brown is supplying a different amount of soybeans, right? His quantity supplied keeps going up as the price goes up. Okay? So it's the same exact thing. Change in price leads to a change in quantity supplied. Change in anything else leads to a change of supply. Okay? Let's go back to the last slide. The relationship between price and quantity supplied allows us to come up with the law of supply. Okay? The law of supply simply states that there is a positive relationship. Remember with demand there was an inverse relationship? Well, now with supply, there's a positive relationship between price and the quantity supplied. Okay? As the price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. If the price goes down, quantity supplied goes down. Right? Just think about if you were selling water bottles. If the price of water goes up, I'm going to make more water bottles. Right? My quantity supplied will go up. If the price of these goes down, I'm not going to make as much. I can't get as much money for them. Okay? So my quantity supplied would go down. That allows us to come up with a supply curve. Okay? So here we have our supply schedule, right? We have a price corresponding to a specific quantity supplied. If you take $1.50, this guy is not going to produce anything. There will be no quantity supplied. But for $2.25, he's going to supply 20,000 bushels. For $3, he's going to supply 30,000 bushels. Okay, so as the price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. So you get this nice positive relationship. Okay? Remember, demand looked like this, right? You had, as price went down, quantity demanded went up, right? As price went down, quantity demanded went up. So we ended up getting this downward sloping demand curve. Well now, here, with supply, as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. So you get a positive slope, okay? You get an upward sloping supply curve, okay? Now, it's important to remember, I've already mentioned this, so I'm going to say it again. For a change in price, if the price changes, then there will be a change in quantity supplied, which means that you move along the curve, okay? You slide along the curve. If the price changes from $2.25 to $3, you simply slide along the curve. Okay? But if anything else changes, if for example, say, the cost of your labor, right? Maybe you have to pay your labor less. Right? Well, if your costs go down, that means you're going to make more profit. Okay? Price hasn't changed. Just your labor costs went down. So if your labor costs go down, what you're going to do is you're going to sell more. You're going to increase your supply. Okay? In the same way, I said that demand is affected by anything other than price. Okay, so price, if there's a change in price, that changes the quantity demanded, which means you're going to have a movement along the curve. And then I said that if there's anything else that changes, that will change demand, which means there will be a shift of the curve. Okay? The analog for supply is that if price changes, quantity supplied changes, which means there's a movement along the curve. However, if anything else changes, it shifts supply. Okay? It changes supply, which means there will be a shift of the supply curve. What are those other things? Some of those other things would be the cost of production. Okay? In order to make a profit, your revenue has to be greater than your costs. Okay? Revenue has to exceed costs, or else you can't make profit, right? Can't make profit because you have to pay more, you have to pay people more, than you're actually taking in. Okay? So your cost of production depends on quite a lot of things. Okay? It depends on the available technology, the price of your inputs, right? The price of labor. Depends on the price of land, the price of capital, the price of energy. Okay? If the price of oil goes up, and this is why America always gets hit by the price of oil going up. Okay? If the price of oil goes up, that doesn't affect you, your cars. Okay? You don't put oil in your car, you put gasoline in your car. What it does, when the price of oil goes up, it raises the cost of production for Exxon and Shell, those guys. And then when their costs go up, they have to raise their prices, so they pass it on to you. Okay? But that's why the price of oil matters so much in this country, right? We don't determine what the price is. So, what ends up happening if, say, the price of oil goes up? If the price of oil goes up, that is an input. So it shifts the production, the supply curve, okay? Because it changes your production conditions, okay? On the other hand, let's say you're making cell phones, right? If the price of Samsung cell phone goes up, well then you're gonna increase the quantity supplied of cell phones, and you're therefore going to slide along your curve. However, if you're Samsung and the price of gas goes up, right, to ship these things, well then what you're going to do is that changes your cost of production, which means your supply curve shifts. Okay? The price is still $500 for the phone, but you now have to pay out a little bit more for your costs. Okay? So here once again, it says movement along a supply curve. Okay? The change in quantity supply brought about by a change in price. Okay? So you move along the supply curve if the price of that good changes. Right? So if we're talking about the water supply, if the price of water changes, then that's going to change the quantity supplied of water, which means we are then going to slide along the curve. On the other hand, if people decide to, let's pretend this isn't water, let's pretend it's Coke. If people decide to stop drinking Coke, right, then that's going to change the supply conditions, which means we will we will shift the curve. Okay? As we can see here, once again, just like we did with demand, if a price changes, what are we looking at here? We're looking at bushels of soy per year. Okay? And this is slide 35. If we're here and the price of a bushel changes, then we're going to change the quantity supplied, which means we're going to slide along the curve. Okay, we slide along the curve. However, if our cost of production goes down, if we don't have to pay our labor as much, right? In other words, if maybe we smash the unions, maybe unions don't exist anymore, okay? If we did that for some reason, then what you end up getting is lower cost labor, which means you don't have to pay your labor as much, which isn't very good for the vast majority of working people, but for businesses that's very good. So what you end up getting is a lower cost, which means you can shift the supply curve to the right. Okay? If you don't have to pay your labor as much, then you're willing to supply more. Because no matter what the price is, doesn't matter what the price is, if you have to pay your labor less, then at every single price level, you're going to be making more profit. Okay? So, once again, just to finally wrap it up, sort of, if the price changes, then that changes quantity supplied, which is a movement along the curve. Okay? It's a movement along the curve. On the other hand, if anything else changes, anything that affects your cost of production, okay? Anything affecting cost of production, then what you're going to do, that will change your supply, which means you will shift your curve. Okay? You'll shift the curve. And that's exactly what this slide number 36 says. Okay? Finally, just with demand, we can identify market supply. Okay? Market supply is if you took the supply of every mom and pop bakery around here, plus Coca-Cola, plus AT&T, and you did that for New Jersey and Pennsylvania and the Northeast, then America. If you took everything that every business was supplying, what you would have is market supply. Okay? So now, and another word for market supply could be aggregate supply. So now we have aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Okay? Alright. Forgot I set it up. So, now we have a supply curve. Okay? Supply at time 0 with our price and our quantity. Okay, well what's an increase of supply? What does an increased supply look like? An increased supply is to the right and down. Okay, it's to the southeast. This way. Okay? That's what an increased supply looks like. Okay? This is very important to memorize, just like with demand. A decreased supply, on the other hand, goes to the northwest, or to the left and up. Okay? That is a decreased supply. Okay? So you have an increase of supply and a decrease of supply. So now let's start bringing this together, okay? We have, and I just want to make sure this is fitting it, it's showing up, or if I have to press harder. Hopefully it's a little bit better. Okay, let's bring this together now. We have quantity, we have a demand curve, and we have a supply curve. We have a price, and we have a quantity. Let's bring them all together now. We have a demand curve that slopes downwards. We have a supply curve that slopes upwards. Okay? Equilibrium, I mentioned at the top of the lecture. Equilibrium is where they meet. Okay? Right here. and that's QD equals QS. Okay? It is where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. Why is it quantity demanded and quantity supplied? Okay. These are little dashed lines I'm drawing. At this price, which I put with an asterisk, okay? At this price, this particular quantity demanded is being demanded, right? At that particular price, that's the quantity demand. And at this particular price, this is the quantity supplied, okay? It just so happens that if the quantity supplied is equal to the quantity demand, we call that equilibrium. Okay? Equilibrium. Why do we call it equilibrium? Well, because just like with the grandfather clock pendulum, right? Once it hits equilibrium, there's no tendency for it to change. Okay? The same way with an economy. If you're in equilibrium, many people believe there's no tendency to change. Okay? That's what the neoclassicals believe. Keynes disagreed. Keynes and post-Keynesians disagree with it, but equilibrium we can all agree on. Okay? Equilibrium is where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Okay? That's the important concept here. On the other hand, we can identify two other situations. Let's say that and I should mention as well. Let's go back to equilibrium. Okay? When a market is in equilibrium, that is, when quantity demand is equal to quantity supply, and you have this price, okay? Whatever the price is, where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, you call that the market clearing price. Okay? Why do you call that the market clearing price? Because the market is said to have cleared. What does that mean? There's nothing left over. Since quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded at that price, then there's nothing left to sell anymore. Right? Whatever businesses made was sold. Okay? So you call this the market clearing quantity. This is a market clearing quantity, and this is a market clearing price. Okay? If you have a market clearing price and a market clearing quantity, then the market has cleared. Okay? It means there's nothing left over. There's no surplus, or there's no shortage, which are the other two concepts we're going to look at right now. If the price is too high for some reason, we don't have to say what it is now, but if the price is very high in the market, if the price is higher than the price needed to clear the market, right? This is P0 because this is what the price is, and this is a P with an asterisk because that's the equilibrium price. Okay? If this price, if the actual price is above the market clearing price, then you have a situation in which the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Okay? Quantity demanded is less than quantity supplied, or quantity supplied greater than quantity demanded. Okay? If the price is too high, if the price in a market is above the market clearing price, then what ends up happening is you end up with something called a surplus. And that's what that is. That's a surplus. Okay? I'm going to zoom in a little more, just to make sure you can capture all this. Okay? So if you end up with a price that's too high, okay? If the price is too high relative to the market clearing price, right? This is the price that would clear the market. This is what would produce equilibrium. But instead, we ended up having a price that's so high. This is our quantity demanded, right? Demand curve. So we have a price and a quantity demanded. And we have a price and a quantity supplied. Well, it turns out that price is far too high for quantity demanded to be equal to quantity supplied. So what we end up getting is a surplus, right? Businesses produced more than people wanted to buy. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, if there's a surplus, that means that things are the good that we're talking about. Could be water bottles, could be sunglasses, whatever. It means that it is relatively abundant. Okay? If something is relatively abundant, right, then it's not that valuable, right? It's all over the place. People can get more of it very easily. It's abundant after all. So if something is very abundant and it's not that valuable, that means the price will go down, right? If it declines in value, its price goes down. So if there is a surplus, right? If there is a surplus and sunglasses are very abundant, then what that means is the price of them, well, if they're very abundant, that means they're relatively less valuable, which means their price will go down, which means as the price goes down, we'll end up coming to the equilibrium price. Right? The price will go down. Okay? Until the market clears. Okay? I hope you understand that. It's not because it's definitely going to be on a test or something. It's just, I know this can be a messy graph and you're not in the classroom to ask me questions. So I'll just draw it one more time. Okay? So if we have a surplus in which the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied, then what ends up happening is this price will keep falling, will keep going down until the market clears. Why will that happen? Because if it's very abundant, right? If the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, then it's all over the place. That particular good is very easy to acquire, which means it's not that valuable, which means the price of it falls. The price of it will fall until the market is in equilibrium, until the market clears. On the other hand, if the price is too low, okay? If the price is very, very low, and it's below the market clearing price, then what we end up having is a situation in which the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. Okay? Quantity supplied is less than the quantity demanded. Okay? In that particular case, you don't have a surplus, you actually have a shortage. Okay? This would be a shortage. You can't see that down there. This is a shortage. Okay? So with that shortage, what's going to end up happening? Well, just think if there was a shortage of water, right? If the quantity demanded of water was greater than the quantity supplied of water, if that happened, something very obvious is going to occur, especially since it's water. If water became scarce, then it becomes incredibly valuable. If it becomes incredibly valuable, the price of it will go up. If the price of it goes up, then this price is going to get raised until it comes to the equilibrium price. And the market clears. Okay? So that is, if there's a shortage, the price is going to go up because that item is relatively scarce. If that item is relatively scarce, it's more valuable. And if it's more valuable, the price goes up until it hits the market clearing price. Okay? So just to recap, if there's a surplus, quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. That means that whatever good we're talking about is relatively abundant, which means it's less valuable. So the price will go down until that price hits the equilibrium price. Okay? Our equilibrium clearing price. On the other hand, if we have a shortage, which is the example currently on the blackboard, if there's a shortage, then what ends up happening is that particular good will be relatively scarce. If something is scarce, then it becomes very valuable. And if it becomes very valuable, that means its price goes up. So if there's a shortage, prices will rise until you ultimately end up coming to the market clearing price. Okay? So that's, so far, in that hour and 15 minutes, that was supply, demand, and equilibrium. Okay? We derived the demand curve, we derived the supply curve, and we derived equilibrium. We also saw about shortages and surpluses. Okay? I'm going to turn off the camera now, and what we're going to do is, in the next hour and 15, what we're going to do is examples of supply and demand analysis. I'm going to teach you something called the 4-step method, and it's how you can analyze supply and demand problems. Okay? And then that will conclude, so we're going to do a bunch of supply and demand problems, and that will conclude Chapter 3 and Week 2's material. Okay? After that point, then we can move on to looking at the neoclassicals, Keynes and the post-Keynesians, and then the textbook Keynesians, okay, which would be weeks 3, 4, and 5. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera now.